Welcome to another episode of I Need a Session. I'm Kim Wilson, your host. If this is your first time joining, this show is all about self-empowerment. I created a safe space for people to share their stories. I believe every human being has a story that is connected to the healing, the growth, or development of another human being. Once again, I have a wonderful show lined up for you. And 5, 4, 3, 2, hit it. Meet Charles Mauldin, a civil rights activist who started as a Selma Youth Leader on March 7, 1965. 17-year-old Charles Mauldin courageously joined peaceful protesters in Selma, Alabama, as they marched for the right to vote. The marchers were brutally beaten by local law enforcement as they crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Mr. Malden was positioned close enough to John Lewis that he heard an officer's billy club crack Lewis's skull. The march is also known as Bloody Sunday. Mr. Malden is one of the surviving marchers who continues to share his history with the youth of today. He is legacy, he is history, he is simply an amazing powerhouse. Hi, I'm Kim Wilson. Welcome to I Need a Session. Today, I'm joined by my very special guest, Mr. Charles Mauldin. We have legacy, we have history in the building this evening. And I want to first take the opportunity to recognize Mr. Malden as legacy. Mr. Malden, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Yes, as you all heard from the intro piece, Mr. Malden played a very vital role in that very famous Bloody Sunday March. And, he's done a lot of interviews and stuff like that talking about it. But today, I want to take a different perspective on it because being a part of any type of movement, the civil rights movement, where people are gathered and there is a cause and a purpose, and a huge component is nonviolence. Somebody hit you, you don't strike back, or to even witness somebody else get hurt. We hear those stories, but what we don't hear as often is the trauma behind those stories. When you see something, you cannot unsee it. And, you get past that day, even just having those images and those thoughts in your mind. So, Mr. Malden, is it okay if we take that approach, look at it from that perspective today?
However you want to go with it, Kim. It's fine with me.
Yes. You can see Mr. Malden, he's done several interviews, and you can just Google Charles Malden Civil Rights Movement, and you can hear him talking about Bloody Sunday. So like I said, today, I want to take a different perspective and talk about what it was like being there that particular day. And if there was any trauma left behind. Trauma is another word for pain. Okay. So, and let me just clarify, this show is called I Need a Session. And I Need a Session is all about this safe space where people can share their stories. It is my hope that somebody would hear something, a word, a term, or something, and it contributes to their growth, their development, their healing, because I believe everybody has a story that is connected to the healing of somebody else's. So, Mr. Malden, being, out there on that bridge that day, um, and we fast forward all these years later to 2021. What stands out in your mind the most?
Really, what stands out the most is I was number 6 in line behind Albert Turner, who's one of the leaders of the Marion movement, where Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot. And so I was number 3. We were in twos, but I was a 6th person in line. And what I remember most about Bloody Sunday, well, of course, the tear gas was devastating, and it just simply caused your lungs to explode. But what really stands out in my mind is hearing the state trooper hitting Congressman John Lewis over the head and giving him a concussion. I'll never forget the sound of him being hit over the head with that billy club. That'll always stay with me.
So I want to go right there to that sound because everything has a sound. I mean, and you fast forward, 60 years later, and you can still hear that sound, the cracking. And for you, when you hear that sound, does it kind of make you want to get quiet? It brings a feeling of sadness, or what do you usually do when you hear that sound?
Well, the older I get, the more solemn I become as a result of having been a part of all of that. And as a matter of fact, it sort of brings back a type of pain that we really covered up when we were young people. Just as I see the young Mexicans and South and Central Americans coming to this country and being put in those detention systems, I sort of think about how untreated our pain was, and thinking that they may very well are being traumatized without even knowing it either. Uh, I started the Foot Soldiers Breakfast about maybe 19, 20 years ago. And that was a forum where people like myself who experienced Bloody Sunday and other events in Selma and surrounding counties could come together and actually tell their stories. And I didn't realize it at the time, but what I discovered from that is that that's sort of an opportunity for people like myself to come and tell their stories really gave us sort of a catharsis. We were able to let out a lot of the trauma that we experienced, not ever knowing that we in fact had that trauma. As a matter of fact, if you were to look at me coming across the bridge, I was very, very, I had a very stern, determined look on my face. But I think it's because I'd stoned myself, because you had to prepare yourself to confront state brutality. And as a young child, the only way you could do that and still stand up to that is to basically put yourself in a space where you couldn't be harmed psychologically.
Mm, Let me just go back, and I want to go back to the term that you use, untreated trauma, because I think probably even back then, in the '60s, I don't even think we were using the word a lot. We were using the word trauma and connecting it to what happened on that bridge or in alleys, or somebody, even just to witness somebody being brutally beaten or attacked. We weren't using the word trauma and thinking like, hey, this had an impact, so it went left untreated because we didn't know to treat it, and a lot of people didn't probably even realize they were walking around with trauma. Like, how did you even make that connection? I know you mentioned that you started the Foot Soldiers Breakfast. How did you make that connection, like, hey, and started using that word trauma? Like, something happened to me and is happening inside of me.
We were very restricted when we were very young. And so the idea of things like trauma were what we call big words that we were never introduced to. Of course, what happened in Selma is that in about 3 months, we were taken from one very rural area to being exposed to some of the greatest people and some of the smartest people in the world. I knew Reverend Abernathy, I knew Dr. King, I knew John Lewis, I knew at the time Pure, Stokely Carmichael, I knew John Love. These were people that I would see on a regular basis. Reverend C.T. Vivian was one of my favorite civil rights activists. Andy Young, people like that were just mainstays in my environment when I was very young. And when I was very young, I thought I would play. My role was to play football, and here I was, 115, 120 pounds wet. And but when I met people like Stokely and Ivanhoe Donaldson, John Love, guys like that sort of created a role model for me. They were basically activists, but they were also educated and influential. And for the first time in my life, I was introduced to people that I could strive to be like. I found myself in meeting them. And that was my road to opening my mind up and better educating myself. And words like trauma came into my vocabulary, and other words like that. So it was really the civil rights movement was an awakening for me. It was it raised my level of consciousness from being in the box, given segregation, to beginning to grow gradually out of the box. And that was an educational and a conscious evolution. And that sort of led me to want to understand not only myself, but my surrounding environment. And so, I ended up going to college going to New Jersey to finish high school, and then to college in Boston, and then traveling for about 2 years to about maybe 15, 16 foreign countries. I spent time in Iran and Turkey and Greece and London and Yugoslavia and really all 6 or 7 European countries, and Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan. I spent 9 months in Afghanistan teaching English as a foreign language, in and out of Pakistan, and traveled the entire subcontinent of India, and went into Sri Lanka at the time. It was called um, Ceylon at the time, Ceylonese tea, people probably remember. And then traveling up the east coast of India and going into Nepal, into the Himalayas, and then back overland, back to Europe. So that was an just a fantastic exposure for a little country boy from Selma like me. And I saw things that were inconceivable had I not really traveled. And that those things that were at one time inconceivable became real for me. And that is sort of what I think the civil rights movement brought out in me. As a matter of fact, I had a mentor. His name was Julian Houston. He went to Boston University also, and was the first president of the student union. He was black, and I remember Julian told me, he said, Charles, ever since your freshman year, you've been talking about going to Tasmania, somewhere like that. He said, if you don't do it now, you'll never get a chance to do it. And basically, having grown up in Selma and been a student leader, I was pretty used to making decisions at a very high level. And sort of I basically made most of my own decision, even in the face of adults, as a matter of fact. But I took Julian's advice, and that's what took me on that journey to travel half around the world.
Okay. Yeah. So there are three things I do want the viewers to take away as it relates to trauma. There's three things we have to always remember. One, trauma has to be acknowledged and validated. Like, this happened to me. Because you can't change or treat anything you do not acknowledge or understand. Secondly, trauma should not be minimized. And one of the ways that we minimize trauma is, oh, that was a long time ago. Oh, it only happened one time. No, it happened. The brain does not differentiate it happening in 1965 versus 2021. The brain does not differentiate that. If it hurts, it hurts. It's not picking out when the pain started. And thirdly, trauma has side effects. For some people, that side effect may look like depression. It may look like anxiety. It may look like not being able to sleep. It may look like an addiction, but it has a side effect. But going back to number one, acknowledging and validating, it gives you the opportunity to manage and treat those side effects. So, when you talk to other people, when you started doing that foot soldiers breakfast and people started sharing their stories, did you find that people were getting treated for their trauma, or it's just, they grew up in the school of thought, like, pray about it and get over it?
You know, people who were really dedicated foot soldiers, they're sort of like regular soldiers, except that we were nonviolent. And soldiers don't normally talk about their experiences unless given an opportunity to. And that foot soldiers breakfast gave people an opportunity to tell their stories. And I think for many of them, they didn't realize how deep their experience had been. And having an opportunity to begin to tell that story, it slowly made it possible for them to sort of recognize their not only the importance of what we did that day, but also how important they were in making a change in history. And the that process helped people to really to probably to begin to deal with that trauma because they had never talked about it before. They'd never heard themselves. They'd never heard their own stories themselves. They'd all kept those stories basically quiet and secret. They'd not. My daughter was like 12 years old before she called me one day, and she had seen me on TV, and she said, "Dad, you're really courageous," you know. And that was the first time I really ever thought about being courageous. And I remember telling her, I don't know if I was courageous. I think that we were just simply tired of being mistreated, you know. But that was the first time I really began to humanize that experience. We, maybe in order to protect ourselves from the hurt that came from that trauma, we sort of did not really acknowledge it. We didn't talk about it. We didn't confront it, you know. And it was really only the last maybe 15 years or so, and I'm 74 now, and have I really began to talk to people like yourself about that. As a matter of fact, maybe beginning at maybe the 50th anniversary, I began to tell my story. You know, what I've normally done is tell other people's story and not make it personal. You know, as a matter of fact, I created a forum for the Foot Soldiers Breakfast, but like, you know, uh, I've never sort of utilized that to really talk about myself. As a matter of fact, I'll probably talk about myself more today than I've done probably in my life.
Wow. So I want to
On a
get in there
personal level.
because I want to get in there real quick because you said something really powerful and I want to make sure people get it because this is where the session is. One of the things that really stood out for me is when you said a lot of times soldiers they don't talk about their experiences and a lot of the foot soldiers they did not talk about their experiences either. But when a forum was created for them to share their stories, people started sharing their stories and they did not realize, just how much they had been impacted by those stories. So I want people to know when we share our story and we understand our narrative, that's where the healing is. When we tell our stories, we are expressing, releasing, we are moving those stories through us so they don't get stuck inside of us. Yeah.
That's exactly what happens, Kim. Uh, and you know, I think that one of the reasons, probably the reason we didn't tell our stories, like our ancestors didn't tell their stories about their pain and their hurt. I think that we sort of don't want to relive the pain that existed as a result of how we were treated.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one of the things that comes along with trauma. Reliving, and sometimes in clinical terms we call it re-experiencing, because again the brain is not differentiating like, hey, this happened years ago. So when you have those thoughts you can feel all of those feelings that came along with that moment, whether you felt anxiety, you felt nauseous, you can even smell things. That's part of the trauma. And so and a lot of times when we do get treated and we go to counseling, we learn coping skills to manage those feelings and to teach and train the brain that you are safe. This is not real. That moment has passed. You are now safe. And there are some different things that we can do, create some new behaviors and thought patterns. The other thing that stood out for me, what you just said, is, like our ancestors didn't talk about it. So we could have some learned behaviors going on that we're repeating and not even know it. Just shh, don't talk about that, don't say anything. And it goes along with that concept. Sometimes it's I have witnessed it more so in the Black community. What goes on in this house stay in this house. We don't talk about our problems, we don't talk about our pain, and we don't talk about our hurts. But when we do, again, that gives us the power to heal our hurts. So just breaking some of those behavior patterns and creating healthy patterns, and even bringing words into our vocabulary, like coping strategies and coping skills, and just like, you said earlier, the word trauma wasn't a part of your vocabulary, but now that the word trauma is a part of the vocabulary, we can actually connect it to treatment. Yeah.
Let me. I remember seeing Congressman John Lewis on TV one time, and he was talking about something. I've forgotten what it was, but he really began to tear. And for some reason, I really could identify with that because I knew what he had really. He spent a whole life of being beaten and traumatized. He was a part of the Nashville movement. He helped to start the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was on the he was on the Freedom Rides. He was in Selma, got beat. So he probably had about as much trauma as anybody could imagine. And so when I saw him cheer, it sort of really sort of reminded me that that he and I probably were holding in some of the same hurt. And for example, if I see something very dramatic or inhumane, I find it very difficult to not really identify with that.
Yeah. So, Mr. Malden, you have witnessed a Black man become the president. Now, you have witnessed a Black woman, become the very first vice president, first woman of the United States. For you, and being a part of that history when we were fighting for voting rights and fighting to be heard, and fighting to have a seat at the table. What were those moments like for you, just to observe that piece of history?
It was great. And one of my friends once told me, he said, Charles, you really crossed the bridge, but you never want to. He said, you really helped make the bridge, but you never walked across it. And I think what he was saying is that I've never really tried to get any credit for anything special that I've done in life. Like I said, even with the Foot Soldiers Breakfast, what the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee taught us is to work with the grassroots folks and don't look for credit, but look for service. And that's what I've tried to do myself.
Yeah.
Whenever you hear the word "I," when people are service oriented, there's something wrong with their service. It's we is the operative word. What we
Yes.
did, what I did.
Yes. So, spending all this time, you continue to labor and do your work and travel the country, as we, move past the civil rights movement. Um, so now that you're in your 70s, what are you up to these days?
Well, with COVID going on, I'm not up to very much. I basically stay in. But when I'm often asked to speak to certain groups, and I especially enjoy talking to young people because I have a tremendous amount of faith in them. I see, as a matter of fact, Latoya Brown, who is from Selma, is one of the co-founders of Black Voters Matter. And I'm really very impressed with young people like her. Tarana Burke spent time in Selma. She started the Me Too movement. So, there have been a lot of folks that I just have a tremendous amount of respect for and support for, and think that the future is in very good hands seeing people like Latoya and Tawana and other people like themselves take the stand and really are providing tremendous leadership.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you continue to talk to young people, because we need your stories. We need your guidance, your leadership, your mentorship. I don't, even if the crowd is 7 or 8 years old, and some of the kids, they're thinking, well, that was so long ago. There's still one little kid in that audience that's going to connect to you, and he's going to, or she's going to hear what you're saying, and it's going to resonate with them. So I'm so happy that you're continuing to use your voice, your stories. I want to go back just a little bit. When, anytime you endure something like a trauma, and somebody seeing somebody get beat and just really pushing this message, you are not worthy, you are not good enough. Was that a struggle for you? Just because if you hear it long enough, some part of you can start to believe it. Did you have to fight to not believe that you are worthy? You are worthy to travel to any country and be treated like a human being. You are good enough.
The civil rights movement began to open up all of our consciousness. And so that, as a matter of fact, when I see commercials on TV now, and one of the things I notice now is that there are a lot of commercials that has Asian people in them. And I remember thinking when I grew up, I remember being in the boys club one time, and whenever somebody black would come on TV, they would gather us all up and make us stop shooting pool or playing ping pong and take us into the TV room to make sure that we could see the black person, Nat King Cole, or people like that on TV. And that was sort of a move because we were so starved for black images. So when I see Asian now on TV now, and this is a very recent development. You're seeing more and more Asian. I say to myself, like that's great, because I remember being not having positive images of myself as a young kid. And how can you have a positive how can you have a positive view of yourself if you never see yourself in any type of positive setting? So that has to be true not only for blacks, but also for Asians and Native Americans and everybody else. So I'm really I'm very aware of like what I see on TV and the impact that has on whatever community is being shown, and how absolutely necessary that is, because I knew how poignant it was for me not to be seen. And if you're not seen, you have to. Your existence is very nebulous. It's not concrete.
Yes, yes. Well, that's why I'm so grateful of the opportunity to sit here with you today, because I think our young people still need to see you. Our middle-aged folk needs to see you. Our senior community needs to see you, because we all have something to offer at any stage in life. And when you can see yourself in somebody else, I think that's one of the biggest motivators. Well, we have really, I think I could talk to you for another 2 hours, Mr. Malden. I feel like I felt a human history book. Our time has come. I thank you so much. You are legacy. You are history. You have done your work and you continue to do your work. And I celebrate you for that. I honor you for that. And I love you for that. Thank you so much, Mr. Malden.